Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel and welcome to the Magnus Carlsen Chess Tour finals in 2020. We're now in the day 6 and today is a very important day. If Magnus Carlsen loses the day 6, then Hikaru Nakamura is of course the winner of the Magnus Carlsen Chess Tour finals. So it's really incredible. Great chess has been played so far, and I have to be honest, I wished before this day 6 that Magnus will win this day 6. Not that I want that Hikaru loses or that Magnus Carlsen is winning. So I really need a 7th day because we have seen so many great games, and I really hoped here now that Magnus can make something happen. Then we can see tomorrow another brutal match game, and then we'll have really sort of a super battle between the two top grandmasters. So let's check out now the first game of the day 6. Magnus played here with the white pieces. It was such a crushing and quite an interesting game with a great attacking performance, with great tactical elements, with great defensive strategies, really all of these elements that we love and that we need in a chess game. Because in some games we saw that both of them were satisfied with draws, but now in this day Magnus pulled off his best tactics and tried to really attack Hikaru Nakamura. So let's see now the day 6, round 1, and of course fight. So Magnus opened here with the move d4. We have knight to f6 by Hikaru, c4, e6 and knight to c3. Most of the times Magnus played this counter Nimzo Indian setup with knight to f3. Now he goes into the most aggressive line with knight to c3. Now we have bishop to b4, and Magnus plays this normal line. The idea behind this setup of white is simply to play bishop to d3. We don't want to challenge this bishop. If black wants to take the knight, he should take it, but at least we don't want to lose another tempo. Yesterday in the Armageddon game, Magnus played the early a3 move. I'm not saying that you will lose the match game because you have played the move a3. It's of course also another line of the Nimzo Indian defense, but I'm saying if you don't need to challenge the bishop, don't do it, because you should simply develop. Here after castling bishop to d3, and now the main idea of this setup is to play knight to e2, which would be sort of a reloading system, and then to play the move a3, and if bishop to c3 happens, then we would have knight takes c3. So again, we would continue with the bishop pair, but at least we haven't weakened our pawn structure too much, because in the last game, if you have followed the Armageddon game of yesterday, then you saw that Hikaru Nakamura doubled the pawn structure, then had really a comfortable game and crushed really Magnus Carlsen with a great performance. So Magnus plays now the normal line, doesn't challenge the bishop, which is really an important opening line, and Hikaru plays c5, which is the most aggressive way now to proceed here. We have now the idea knight to e2 and now d5. But now it is a possibility to play the move a3, because if black wouldn't have played the move d5 and something like knight to c6, then a3 would lead again into a complicated line. Let's see the possible continuation. Maybe knight to c6, a3, bishop to c3, and here we would have a similar position from yesterday where b takes c3 is played, and again black doesn't need to take now the pawn on d4, and doesn't need to undouble this pawn structure on c4 and c3. He doesn't need to do that. But here Hikaru played another line. He played the move d5, and now, but really now, it's possible to play the move a3. These are these tiny little things in the opening. After the move a3, bishop to c3. Okay, b takes c3. We have now the double pawn structure. But you see, after the move d5, black has. It's not, again, I'm pointing out, it's not a mistake, it's not an inaccuracy, it's just a different line, which allows now Magnus Carlsen to undouble his pawns, because the c4 pawn is challenged and we can trade it off. So this is a better line for Magnus Carlsen, because he can now play with the bishop pair without a double pawn structure like yesterday in the Armageddon game. Now he has really a better position from the opening. So d takes c4, bishop to c4. Still, this is common theory, and here queen to c7 played by Hikaru. So the idea behind this move is, of course, this discovered attack after c takes d4. So that's why Magnus played bishop to a2, retreating with the bishop. But now Magnus Carlsen will build, I like to call it the Garry Kasparov attack, because there is one game of Garry Kasparov where he placed the bishop here on b2 and placed the bishop behind this pawn structure, this really flexible pawn structure, c3, d4, e3, where he really unleashed the power of the bishop and played really a great attacking performance. So it's really, as I said, I really like to call it the Garry Kasparov attack we have now by Magnus Carlsen. So he is really frustrated because of the loss of yesterday. Now you see the rage of the world champion. So b6. Here Hikaru fixes, of course, the pawn structure. Also is trying to develop the bishop on a6 or maybe to b7. Still with his common ideas, knight to c6, knight to a5, knight to c4. Getting use also of some light square weaknesses because there are several targets here for black. Black can really occupy this square. So castling, bishop to a6, bishop to b2, knight to c6, and now rook to c1. Of course, when you have troubles where to place the rook, this is a normal idea because we have now the tension here in the center. So it means when something is getting opened, if the position gets too opened, then there are always these discovered attack possibilities. Of course, they are not immediately happening, but in long terms, maybe something could get opened and we could really have a dangerous attack against the queen. So here, rook to c8, played by Hikaru. And this was his first inaccuracy in the game because the normal idea is also to counterattack the queen, rook to d8 or maybe rook from a to d8. The idea is the same. Again, if something opens, then we would have also this discovered attack on the queen. Rook to c8 is a little bit unnecessary. As I said, it's a little bit too passive because Magnus now plays the move c4 immediately because he hasn't been challenged in the center on the d file. So that's why it's possible now to push the pawn with c4. So we have c takes d. E takes d. We have now this flexible pawn structure, the so-called hanging pawns in the center. The hanging pawns is sort of a pawn structure which is basically good for both sides because the hanging pawns idea can be attacked by black when you face the hanging pawns here. From black's perspective, one of the main ideas is simply to attack the weakness with knight to a5. So we should really try to grab one of these pawns or at least attack it. One of the other ideas is to block it somehow. Maybe if c5 happens and for instance we would have the pawn on b5, then to simply stop the hanging pawns, stop the mobility of the central pawns with a blockade, for instance like the move knight to d5 and really block out the bishop. So as I said, the main ideas against hanging pawns are to block them or to chase them. So this is simple as that. But Magnus Carlsen plays here a very interesting idea after the move queen to e7. Again, Hikaru didn't challenge with rook to d8, and now we have the Garry Kasparov attack here by Magnus Carlsen d5. And I've seen one comment on by Garry Kasparov himself where he mentioned that he used to teach when he was the coach of Magnus Carlsen, that he used to teach Magnus Carlsen the dynamic position because Magnus Carlsen showed from his early ages good positional skills, but when Garry Kasparov trained him, when Garry Kasparov coached him, then he knew how to play dynamic positions. He mentioned that I believe in the game it was Anish Giri versus Magnus Carlsen, where Magnus Carlsen, it was from the last year, where Magnus Carlsen crushed Anish Giri in 25 moves. The commentary by Garry Kasparov was really great. He was saying something like, if Anish Giri is worth like 2,800 rating points, then Magnus Carlsen is worth at least 2,900. The question was, can Magnus reach the 2,900 rating point mark? So it was great commentary also by Garry Kasparov. So you see now, here Magnus plays really like Garry d5, immediately opening the position for the bishop pair because we need the open position. So here he takes d5 and Magnus plays rook to e1, simply sacking the pawn, creating new dynamics, creating, as I said again, when you have troubles to where to place your rook, the best way is to place it on the queen. Again, we have some discovered attacks, maybe knight to f4, knight to g3, knight to d4. So many attacking possibilities. Bishop to c4. And one of the main ideas when you have the bishop here, you don't want to trade off the bishop. So you need to stay with them in the game. Knight to g3, discovered attack on the queen, queen to d8, and now bishop to e1. So you see where the bishops are aiming, where the queen is aiming, where the rooks are aiming. Now we have a perfect attack against the castle king here. b5. Hikaru is cementing his bishop on c4. We have knight to f5, which is also very nice square for the knight. It is the most natural square for where you're really trying to fix the knight, and now there are some tactical threats with knight to g7, also with knight to h6 or similar ideas. So d4 played by Hikaru. You may ask yourself this question: what happens if knight takes d4 happens? Why Hikaru sacrificed the pawn? It's not a problem because here it leads now into simplified line, knight takes d4. At least the knight is not on this very active square, an annoying square on f5. After bishop to d5, d4, you don't want to take off course with the queen, because then the queens are off the board, and white could have some problems because black has here the 2 versus 1 situation on the queen side. So that's why taking the pawn is not an option. But we need now another path to attack the king. Here, Magnus played queen to d2 with the immediate checkmate threat here. Queen to g5 is, of course, a serious threat. So that's why Hikaru is trying bishop to e6, at least trying to trade off this knight on f5, and now rook to c5 played by Magnus. He simply activates the pieces. These are really the normal rules of the attack. So when you don't find the best attacking moves, at least use the principle of the most active square. So you see now, when we evaluate the position, this bishop is good. It cannot be improved. So I really need you to take a break now and really listen. This is very important, because when you have such a position like this, you always ask yourself which piece can be improved. So here, the bishop, I don't think that it can be improved. The bishop on e1 cannot be improved. The knight on f5 cannot be improved. If queen to g5, this could be an option of the improvement of the piece. So again, we're searching for the most and the next active square for our piece. So queen to g5 would be a possibility, but then bishop to f5 will probably happen, and we don't have anymore this powerful knight. Let's see this rook. Rook cannot be improved. Rook to e2 doesn't bring you so much. So on this file, this rook cannot be improved. So the only piece that can be improved is the rook on c5. Maybe queen to f4 is also an option, but I think that black would simply give up again his bishop for a knight. So rook to c5. These are these main principles: attack, the next attacking square we're searching. So a6. Here, not a good move by Hikaru. He should have played here probably bishop takes f5, because after bishop to f5 we would have queen to d6 attacking the rook. So although our rook is hanged, but at least we can grab this rook, and again trying to simplify the position. But Hikaru played here after the move rook to c5, a6, fixing the pawn. He was a little bit scared that Magnus will go for this pawn, but in these types of position, in this dynamic open tactical game, it's simply not about pawns. I don't think that Magnus would have taken this pawn even if Hikaru would have played something else like rook to e8, maybe queen to d7. I'm not sure, but I don't think that Magnus would go for the pawn. Magnus would search here, I'm sure, for some tactical possibilities. a6, and now knight to g7. As I said, this was the tactical threat. We have bishop to king to g7, and now queen to g5, king to h8, and you see now we have queen to h4. The idea behind this move is a really great tactical idea. Rook to c6, bishop to d4, bishop to f6, and queen to h7 is our plan. So in order to protect everything, here you have to find the correct move. I want you to pause the video and try to find the defensive idea here for Hikaru. Take your time, take your maybe 10-15 minutes if you can really find the best defensive move here for black. It's really hard to see. As I said, I really analyzed this game with an engine, of course. I don't want to sound that I know everything, but I wouldn't see it probably. Also, Hikaru didn't see it, and here he missed the only good defensive piece, the defensive move, and the move is rook to e8. This is the principle of the counter attack, because there is, of course, always this idea: bishop to d5, rook to c6, bishop to d4, bishop to f6. But at least you see now we could have some tension on the e file. So we would use simply the principle of counter attack. So now if rook takes c6 happens, then we can take rook takes c6, and it seems now that bishop to d4 is a dangerous move. But now bishop to f5 would solve really all of our positional problems now in the game, and here basically white is lost, which is really incredible with such a great attacking performance. You see now you have to react on the e file. So in order to make something happen after here, instead of this rook to c6, maybe h3 would be an idea to create a breathing space and then try this rook takes c6 idea. But now maybe black can go with bishop to f5, undermine the pressure. After rook takes e8, we would have knight takes e8, queen takes d8, and simply trying to trade off more pieces. And again, we would play simply king to g8, and this could be defendable here for black with some knight to e6 ideas. Really, after then at least the rook to g5 is not an immediate possibility, and we would simply try to escape with our king here. So rook to e8, as I said, the only good defensive piece here, move, pardon me. And here in the game after queen to h4, here Hikaru tried rook to g8, and Magnus plays now this tactic, rook takes c6, rook takes c6, bishop to d4, king to g8, and now queen to h7, check. You cannot take, of course, because of the pin by the bishop. We have king to f8, and now queen to h6. King to e8, Hikaru escapes, but now bishop to f6, after queen to a5, queen to e3, protecting, of course, the rook. We have now really a complicated position in which black is, of course, up the exchange. But white has really this dominant bishop pair all over the board. The position is about equal, playable for both sides, because now after the move queen to b6, which wasn't the best of moves here by Hikaru, a better idea is to play rook to d6, at least staying with the queen here, and we would have still the tension between the queen and the rook, so the queen couldn't then play so much freely here all over the board. We would love, of course, to include somehow the queen into the game, but it's not possible immediately because the rook would be under fire. So here Hikaru played queen to b6, and now Magnus played rook to d1, which was now a move that was also a mistake. It's of course a fast time format. You cannot see this stockfish alpha 0, lila 0 engine moves. Rook to d1, not the best of moves, because of course it seems like a good idea. You cannot take, queen takes e3, then you get checkmated on d8. It was a good tactical threat, but this move brings back to life Hikaru Nakamura, because here a better idea is to play bishop to e4, attacking the rook. So after queen to e3, then we would have the intermediate check with bishop takes c6. And black could probably try something like rook to d6, but now queen to f3. After king to f8, now white should really go into a simplified line with a simple bishop to e5, and here trying to simply play h4, h5, h6, and simply try to promote this pawn to queen. So it's a better position here for white. The evaluation is winning for white in this particular line. So as I said, here Magnus pull off also great tactical idea, rook to d1, but here Hikaru has a simplification move, rook to d6, we have bishop to d4, and now queen to c6. And this move is again a mistake, because here Hikaru missed a counterattack. And here I want you also to pause the video, so we always like to say, so test your might. Find the counterattack idea here by for black. You don't have to retreat with the queen. I hope you can see this move. It's a great defensive move, which Hikaru unfortunately missed. The move here, after the move bishop to d4, is b4. If white plays g3, you cannot take, of course, immediately. Bishop takes b6 because you get rook to d1, a checkmate. So you would be forced to play something like g3 or maybe even f3. But now we can simply take, which is the incredible thing, incredible tactic. B takes a3. If you take the queen, we would simply take the rook, king to g1, and now we simply take the pawn on the bishop on b1. If you try something like queen to d4 in order to deliver checkmate on d8, then we can simply sacrifice the rook for the bishop, queen to b6, and now a2 leads into a perpetual draw with some checks, and it's 0.0 evaluation here. So Hikaru missed this move, b4. He played queen to c6, and it gives now Magnus the opportunity to play this very annoying bishop to e4 and h3, because h3 is really necessary, because you saw there are always these problems. We want to play freely with our rook and then include both of our bishops into the game and really try to checkmate black here. In the game, king to d7 was played, and now rook to d2. And now again, the evaluation is now slightly better for white. White needs, of course, to go with some h4, h5 lines. And here Hikaru has again the opportunity to play a good defensive move, but again, he missed that move. So I want you to choose between rook. That's the only question here. Rook to e8 or rook to d8. That's my question. Where should we play with our rook? So of course we need to include our rook into the game, but there is only one good square. Or you can also choose maybe rook to c8. So between these three squares, where should we play with the rook? So the question is that. So okay, here Hikaru played rook to e8, which is, of course, it seems at least like a good move, because again, we're thinking we have some tactical threats on the e-file. But there is one problem behind this move, because when you play rook to d8, let's see the possible continuation after rook to d8. So when a check is played here, like maybe a dangerous check with the queen to a7, you see we could always escape with our king to e8. So we would hide behind our rook, and then no checks would be possible. So that's why rook to d8 or rook to c8 are the only defensive moves here, because what white could try here is a potential bishop to e5 move, but that's not possible, because after the move rook to d8, we would simply play queen to c1, and it would be game over. So that's why here you see now the problems after the move rook to e8, because now king to h2 was played by Magnus, and I want you to pay good attention how we could escape here if the king would be on, if the rook would be on d8 or on c8. So here after the move bishop to e5, we have bishop to f5, the check, bishop to e6, and now bishop to d3, attacking the queen, queen to a4, and now bishop to e5. As I said, this was the main tactical threat. After the move rook to d5, we have now queen to a7, and it was game over. It's a forced checkmate line. If you try, of course, queen to c6 or queen to c8 or queen to c6, you get queen to c7, a checkmate. So you see, if your rook would be on d8, then this tactic wouldn't work. Then we would simply hide with our king. So it's, of course, an alpha zero stockfish line that Hikaru missed. It's really hard to see. As I said, I'm analyzing these games with an engine. I wouldn't see it, of course, for sure. And but as I said, here Magnus showed really his great attacking skills. Still, this was a better game for him in the end. Although Hikaru missed, as I said, his defensive ideas, but as an attacking game, it was really great for us to see, because I'm not used Magnus Carlsen that he attacks like this in this Mikhail Tal, Bobby Fischer, Garry Kasparov style, really sort of a romantic style that Magnus Carlsen is playing. He's more of a pragmatic player, but this attack was really great, and even against Hikaru Nakamura finds really counterattacks when he needs to. In this game he couldn't, because these tactics were really too complicated. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. It was a great game, maybe one of the best of this final so far. If you want to see more games of this tournament, check out the link. Here are also some analyzed games. And if you want to see the best chess games in history, check out also my best chess games of all time series. And if you like this content, you can also subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.